All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Josh Fraser. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Flexera, and thank you so much for joining. First off, big shout out and thanks to Jevin for setting the stage with the macro view. Budgets are still rising, rising by quite a bit. AI is changing the cost model, and the pressures to turn complexity into outcomes has never been higher. And it's always a pleasure to hear from Jeremy Chaplin. So, Jeremy, appreciate the follow up there and the context around the technology value is framing, particularly the idea that we're moving from tracking spend to coaching teams to manage the value across more categories. So what we're going to do now is pivot into making it real. The next 30 minutes, I'm really excited to be leading a practitioner panel. And we have with us two leaders who are in the work day to day. We'll cover what's actually changing inside FinOps teams, how they build a hybrid view of spend, how they make unit economics actionable, how they show that they're approaching AI cost governance, and where automation is genuinely helping versus adding to the noise. Think of this as kind of a training with champions, real people leading real teams that are actually doing the work. And we're going to hear from them, what they changed as FinOps evolved, what they wish they had done sooner, perhaps, what they're building next, so that you can get really practical advice and helpful hints in terms of how you take your own organization forward. So without further ado, I would like to invite and welcome Salami Keet. She is the head of software asset management and FinOps at FirstRand Bank. FirstRand Bank is out of South Africa, and she leads both the SAM and FinOps practice at FirstRand. So great example of FinOps kind of expanding into these new scopes and domains, which is a portfolio of integrated financial services and businesses. She'll share how they're building a hybrid view of tech spend, where ITAM, SAM, and FinOps are converging at FirstRand, and what it takes to create accountability across teams as the scope expands. And we're also joined by Eric Malartrick. He's the FinOps lead at Boomi, and Eric leads FinOps at Boomi, which is an integrated team that's helping enterprises connect apps, data, and APIs. He'll dig into how they make unit economics real at Boomi, how they're approaching AI cost governance, and where automation is actually helping their teams move faster as opposed to just adding to the noise. And we're going to focus on kind of four core acts here. We're going to talk a bit about expanding scope in Act 1. Then we're going to move into how we're approaching proving value out, shift into how we're governing AI spend, and then finally close things out on the changes to the operating model and automation. So Salami and Eric, welcome to the panel, and thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us, Irby.
Thank you for having us.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's dive right in. So as you heard earlier, the FinOps scope has expanded and it continues to expand. This is nothing new. Every year we're seeing FinOps take on more and more and putting more and more pressures and responsibilities on the practitioners and teams that are leading this challenge. It's a super exciting expansion. I think we can all agree with that, but it also may be somewhat daunting. It's putting a lot of pressure to change and more accountability on you all. As you heard earlier, the latest State of FinOps 2026 survey showed that 90% of FinOps teams are now managing SaaS, 64% are managing software licensing, 57% are managing private cloud, 48% are responsible for traditional data centers. So needless to say, a pretty remarkable and sizable shift in terms of expansion of scope. So I want to dig in and talk first and hear from you, Salami. So when scope started expanding at FirstRand, what was that like? What changed first? What broke first? The data or the ownership of the process? And what did you and your team do to kind of lead that shift, if you will? So Salami, over to you.
Thank you, Josh. I think for us, it wasn't so much about changing or breaking anything. Maybe if it was 3 years ago, when we were still when the FinOps processes were still really mostly cloud-based, I think then the process and certainly the data ownership would have been a bit of a mess. You had data coming from all kinds of sources, and I think if you were just to take that and you would just pull that together, that would have been a major mess. But I think what really made a difference in our organization was breaking the silos down. We already had good information in finance. We had good information in IT asset management. We have good information in FinOps. And I think what worked for us was to actually getting the ownership of the individual data and then taking those data sources together and bringing it all together in one full picture. That really made a big difference in our life. And then, of course, relating the finance, the ITAM information, and relating that to the engineering information and the usage so that you can actually understanding your economics of the base. So that made a big difference. So if it was FinOps doing it by themselves, a lot of things would have broken. But I think it is the collaboration, and I think it is actually the working together, breaking the silos, and all teams working to proving business value of your IT spend. That was for us where the focus was, and I think as an organization we really aimed to look at the end goal rather than focus on the politics.
Now, Salome, you of course now have direct responsibility of leading the teams for both ITAM and FinOps. I'm assuming that wasn't always the case. Where did you start? Was it FinOps and then ITAM came in, or was it the other way around? And when did that happen during this journey that you've been on at FirstRand?
So I've been looking after software asset management for the past 13 or 14 years. Don't judge my age. For a long time. About 5 years ago, but way back then, FinOps was a little bit of our portfolio in any event. Looking after the assets in the cloud was a little bit of what we were doing in any case. So when FinOps actually came together and it became a discipline, it was only natural for me to put up my hand and say, let's actually look at running FinOps and software asset management together. So it wasn't me taking over anything. It really was just us pulling it all together under a logical framework.
Wonderful. No, I appreciate you sharing a bit about that journey. Eric, how about you? What was the first practical change that happened at Boomi and within your group as the scope of FinOps started to expand in this way?
So I've been in this particular role as leading FinOps since like 2019 now. But my passion, personally has always been to find like inefficiency within resources. And it actually goes back to like probably 15 years ago where I used to look and dig into like telco circuits and figure out like why telco circuits exist. The important piece is why. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we spending a bunch of money on a certain set of resources? For me, when I started picking up SaaS, which was many years ago, I started digging into the why we're using it in certain patterns and building the relationships, because I sit in engineering with the engineers who are using said technology. So I'll use an observability platform as an example here. So we spend a bunch of money on an observability platform, but what are we actually doing? Why are there so many logs in there? Why are there so many metrics? How are we using these metrics? Are we consuming them? Just digging, because I'm a naturally curious person, into how we are using it, and then having the conversations to figure out if like, okay, so we've got 85 users that are seldom using it. Can we drop them to a different tier and spend less for those particular sets of users? But for me, the visibility and the collaboration and the curiosity has led success for managing other things like SaaS and, of course, now AI within our particular organization.
Great. So it sounded like just this was a natural progression and just the next thing that fit very well in terms of where your mindset and how you were approaching the problem to begin with was anyway. So yeah, wonderful. No, I appreciate the background there. Let's move on and dive into proving value. And as we heard earlier from Jeremy, unit economics is really at the end of the day the core value measure in terms of how we look at FinOps, the impact that it's having. And as we heard from the State of the Cloud FinOps report, we had 49% of teams saying that they primarily use, so almost half, unit economics to align spend with the specific outcomes that they're delivering. Eric, let's start with you. What unit metrics actually changed decisions for you? How do you incorporate that at Boomi, and how did you get teams to trust those metrics and really orient business decisions around them, as opposed to those metrics just being more vanity KPIs?
Yeah, so it is tough. There is yes, they can be vanity KPIs. I understand that. They can be pretty graphs, but really, what do they tell? For me, it's digging into, number one, what is our core platform, right? And what do we want to understand out of our core platform? For us, we like to understand what it costs for a customer to run in our environment, so the cost per customer. In order to build that up, we had to have a foundational tagging strategy that would map out different facets of our infrastructure, so we could really understand what each piece costs, and then understand how many customers we currently have running through our platform. That has led to making decisions like, hey, we're potentially evaluating bringing on a customer that's going to have a longer data retention period, and they're going to consume a bunch more data. So can you help map out what the cost would be for a customer who's going to have extra usage? And because we have a unit economic of also cost per customer and cost per gigabyte stored, that allows us to kind of extrapolate out and test whether or not this customer could come on board at the existing pricing strategy that they're currently at. So we've used it in partnership with finance to figure out what is a good deal and a custom deal that might make sense for customers on the sales side. That to me is the most important part, right? Because we're in it to make money. We don't want to lose money here. So really understanding and mapping out the infrastructure is what we've done, and have applied it to very interesting sales conversations.
So you've had a unit metric, in this case, cost per gigabyte stored, that has fundamentally altered the way that sales looks at and values deals, and ultimately may take the deal or not take the deal, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah, or make sure that the pricing structure is proper for the deal. Yeah. So that's extremely important, because otherwise you could just be saying, that's a lot of data. I don't know. No, let's not do it, right? And then it's a bad deal.
No, completely makes sense. Salome, how about you? What is that metric that you're using as a proxy at FirstRand to help generate outcomes or guide the business?
To be honest, for us, there's no single bullet. There's no one golden metric that we could have used. I think we have hundreds of different services and revenue streams that we would like to ultimately relate our costs to, right, from a unit economics point of view. That is a work in progress, to be honest. So for us, understanding at first your vCPU cost per unit, for instance, similar to what Eric is saying, understanding your SaaS license cost per user, and relating those to the other workloads, and relating those in terms of actually transactions processed, etc., etc. We try to use the most relatable unit metric to the business, and that we have found to be there's many around that we are actually utilizing. But just to give you two examples, and to track those then against similar workloads, to at least understand your efficiencies, is a good starting point before you actually get to the entire picture of what is generating that revenue. Because in large organizations, that can certainly be a challenge of enormous proportions to get all of the pieces of the pie together. So start small. Even if you start with the basics and tracking and understanding your basics, that is taking you a long end to actually get to where you eventually want to be in terms of understanding your exact revenue, your exact customer revenue per transaction, etc., etc.
Yes, that's actually a great segue. So Eric, it sounds like you may be at a little bit more advanced maturity stage at Boomi than FirstRand is this particular topic. And if our audience out there is representative of what the FinOps Foundation found in the survey, half of them are sitting there, perhaps at a lower maturity state. So what was that journey like at Boomi? How did you first identify what is that right metric to double down on? How did you get buy-in within the organization? What were the earlier stages that you went through, keeping in mind that some folks may be struggling in terms of where they might want to start?
You really have to think about how your business, or how your customers are using your product. In our case, right? They are sending lots of data or using a particular data storage facets of our application, right? So think about what's important to you. So in this case, for us, it is very much data consumption and data processing. So figuring out and mapping your infrastructure to understand where your data is processed or where your data is stored gives you the ability to have, number one, understand the cost of that, and number two, you have to be able to understand like what the throughput or the flow is going to be. So naturally speaking, if you can tie your consumption with the cost of your infrastructure, you can map out that cost per gigabyte stored or cost per gigabyte processed. But you have to really think about what's important to your business and what you want to measure. Just looking at, cost per customer may show you, what an average customer costs, but does that really show the little ones versus the big ones, right? It's just kind of making it an average basis.
And when you went through that process, who did you work in close partnership with? Was this something that was really championed by the FinOps team? Was this in partnership with finance, engineering, sales, perhaps, product? Where were your key stakeholders?
It was me understanding and growing my FinOps practice that I've built. One of the things that is common, as we know from the survey, is unit economics are important. So I really wanted to get out ahead of that years ago and figure out like, hey, part of our product is, launches for a particular product. Part of it is golden records that we have. So understanding because I knew where the costs were, but I didn't understand like the volumes and where to get the volumes from. So I built a partnership with like product and finance to figure out where the consumption data was and just married the two together. So.
Got it. Now, good stuff. Let's move on to the topic du jour here, governing AI spend. Of course, on everyone's minds, you heard loud and clear in the State of FinOps report. 98% of FinOps practitioners are focused on managing AI spend. First off, I'd love to meet the 2% that are not. So if you're on the call today, please put forth a comment there so we can talk to you. We'll pull you live on the stage. But all jokes aside, let's talk about that. So Eric, let's start with you. As FinOps moves into AI more aggressively here, and as AI spend continues to increase, and the platforms and tools and things that are in use, and organizations are more and more putting pressure on their stakeholders to adopt AI, help us understand what you're doing to provide visibility and ownership around the cost side of AI without stifling the innovation, the adoption pressure that your stakeholders that you serve are clearly under.
Yeah, number one was establishing core visibility for AI, right? We consume multiple AI applications within our environment. We use multiple coding assistants and all that fun stuff. But having like a single pane of glass was pretty important to be able to understand like where we're trending. But number two, in working with engineers, I sit in engineering, and I've been working with them on establishing a coding assistant and really getting the word out on how to measure consumption in this pay-as-you-go token-based economy is real important. You got to be able to have the data back to the engineer so they can understand how they are consuming. So as we started rolling out, it was very important, as per a training and as per education and recorded sessions, to make sure that engineers were able to see the data in near real time as they are consuming. So we've built that mentality and culture right from the beginning as we ramp up the usage for these particular coding assistants.
Did that roll out in conjunction with the adoption, like the governance and visibility, or did it come later?
It rolled out with the adoption. So we did it as part of the project of adopting new AI coding assistants.
Got it. Okay. Salome, at FirstRand, as you're getting more aggressive with AI, what guardrails are set up there, and how did that happen?
A very similar process on our side. We focused and are focusing a lot of attention on the control environment and understanding who's using what and where. I think that is the first major thing that we were working on, and as we are rolling out, that we're just making sure that those governance processes of understanding your data is very clearly defined. But I think another piece where we are also using a lot of and spending a lot of time is exactly as Eric is saying, is guiding and training our engineers to make sure that we don't use please and thank you in our hero prompts, for instance. A lot has been said about that. I'm saying that tongue in the cheek, but using AI effectively, prompting effectively. What does good look like? So for us, FinOps isn't a policeman. We're not a policeman. We are guidance. We are guardrails. We are influence. We are enablers. And that is where we are focusing on, to try and assist the guys, because everybody knows that cost is a major factor, right? So it's really about enabling the people to understand their own costs and enabling them to actually look at ensuring that when they are coding as efficiently. When we are looking at GPUs, we are at least making sure that it's right-sized, etc.
When you both first encountered these stakeholder groups around that education journey, where did you find they were at? Did they basically understand the broad stroke concepts and how consumption-based and token-based was different, or was this more of a foreign concept that you had to really start from scratch in terms of helping them understand the economic model behind these AI-based solutions?
Sorry, are you speaking to Eric? Apologies. Eric, go.
Yeah, both of you, please. But Eric, let's start with you.
Yeah, so tokens are a foreign concept to engineers. I mean, up until, I don't know, call it a year, 2 years ago, right? And usually, like, the goal of FinOps was to connect engineers to the dollars being spent. But now you're being connected to tokens, which have an abstract value, right? They're different depending on what model you're using. So it further abstracts the engineer to the dollar, which I find it being, kind of annoying. But the other thing is, even if you drop token prices, which we've seen, it actually might be more expensive because the context windows are bigger and you can use more faster depending on which model and coding assistant you're using. So you can end up spending a ton more money, even though it's actually cheaper, which is brilliant out there in terms of forecasting and budgeting. But at the end of the day, like, having the conversations with the engineers from the beginning, talking about visibility, and then talking with them about best practices about how to use this particular coding assistant has helped in a concert way of rolling it out to the rest of the organization, because engineering, the actual core engineers are using it and sharing how the best practices, of how to actually use the software, and myself is using or providing information on how to track the visibility. So it's worked pretty well, but we're still early in this journey. We're crawling, but I can say that, like, spend has doubled month over month, and it's continuing to trend that way. So it's starting to get significant.
Right. Salome, how about you? What was the level of awareness and education journey when you first started here?
We've got front runners that actually has quite a bit of maturity and have been in the game, and we have people that is not so clued up, right? So I think we have pockets of better and pockets of lesser maturity, but I think it's, as Eric is saying, for us as well. This is a crawling game at this stage, and we are all learning together. I think the front runners are helping. And they're helping a lot. And but I think in terms of getting to where we actually want to be in terms of FinOps with AI, being able to actually say, has it reduced your time to market, for instance, etc. Getting to those kind of things is still going to be some time off until we can actually get to the actual nuts and bolts of the business value of it.
Yeah, and Salome, we talked a lot about the interaction with engineers and developers, but same question, but geared towards core stakeholder groups, particularly in this case procurement and finance. What are you finding there? What were the expectations, and what's that journey been like?
I must say, I think our finance and procurement people are really right on track in terms of the AI journey at this stage. They are very supportive. There's a lot of curiosity, and we are finding that finance is dabbling in their own AI at the moment. I mean, this is actually, we are seeing really lots of excitement across the organization. In terms of spend, of course, that is something that we are really tracking very, very closely with finance, with procurement. Pulling all of that data sources together, exactly as Eric was saying, is a big focus for us, to just make sure that while everybody is so excited about this, and while this is a growing phenomenon, that we actually just make sure that we keep tabs on the cost and that we're not duplicating effort.
And that's it. And Eric, I assume similar on your end, you're interacting heavily with finance and procurement.
Yes, it is a must. From a procurement perspective, we want to make sure we're getting the best deal. And from a finance perspective, we want to make sure we're directionally accurate, not blowing through budgets. And eventually we have plans of having something like token budgets and all that, but that is further when we're actually like walking.
Yeah, it's an interesting segue into our final act here, which is how we take all this and create operating models that can scale. And although neither of you specifically stated it, it certainly was implied that it sounds like the organization was very much looking to you and your teams to lead the way here and to be the experts. Yes, we're all learning, but they immediately started turning to the FinOps groups within the respective orgs to provide some answers here. Which I think is great. And it's also a great opportunity for everyone in the audience. So on the notion of scale, 81% of respondents in the FinOps survey noted that, they operate with a centralized enablement or hub and spoke execution. So basically, you're the center of it all. You're the one that's expected to provide these answers to guide the organization. So what kind of strategies have you systematized, and what kind of areas have you focused on that can help kind of guide the AI adoption, but do it in a responsible way where you can optimize what you're consuming and provide that needed visibility and guardrails, but still provide that kind of human judgment, if you will, to it all, so it stays in control. Salome, let's start with you. What's going on there that's helping kind of accelerate, but do it responsibly and scale?
So I think obviously the first one is data, and data needs to be as automated as possible. So your data platform is your first one, and I think that goes without saying. The second portion of what we are focusing on to automate is actions, low-hanging fruit. So right-sizing actions that are not, for instance, taking a GP2 to a GP3 in your AWS world, from an EBS storage point of view, things that is a very small, that really can make a monetary difference, but really doesn't have a big impact. Automate as much of those things as possible, terminating your idle instances, etc. Matters like that. I think your last one is your process actions, and that is where you can't necessarily automate it. And this is where perhaps you get an anomaly in a production environment. You can't necessarily automate the resolution of it, but you can certainly automate the process of getting the resolution. Automate your strategy via your FinOps tool to actually getting the service tickets raised, etc., so that your process of actually getting to the actions is as smooth and as streamlined as possible. So those are really the three pieces that we are focusing on. Your human will always, where there's a potential for loss, you still need your human judgment, but low risk and data, automate as far as possible. That was what we were focusing on.
And is it safe to say that the core is to drive adoption as efficiently and as automated as possible right now versus, make it as efficient financially as possible? Is that
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
100%.
Oh, good. Yeah, good stuff. Eric, how about you? When you think about automation and how you're, accelerating adoption, but doing it in a responsible way, where are you guys adopting techniques to scale here?
Well, you made a savvy acquisition not too long ago where you purchased ProsperOps. I have been using ProsperOps for a very long time, probably 4.5, 4 years, I think, to this month.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. it has made a significant difference in my life where I don't even really think about commitment management anymore. So, that's been removed from my brain while I just hand it off to ProsperOps to take care of. The second piece is we have started installing like efficiency hammers, I'll call it, within sandboxes where we have some governance where if you are not using CPU, as in if you're routinely under 30%, you're going to get a ticket into your queue, you're going to be communicated with, and eventually if you take no action, that resource is going to get turned off. So, starting to drive efficiency, especially in the non-production environments, automatically without intervention from us has helped.
When you think about those efficiency hammers, love that term, by the way, and tie that back to what you mentioned earlier about tokens and, we'll call it the sneakiness of or the power of the model if you're one of these vendors in terms of, how they change the context that they're applied to and whatnot. Where do you see those hammers being able to be deployed, for lack of a better way of putting it, in the token and consumption-based approach that we're seeing more and more from these vendors?
And so there's number one, using those tools, I'll call them AI agents, to investigate for you. Like one of the things we're working on here is to have basically an AI agent that will see an anomaly that comes in, and it will have the context and understanding and access to be able to see, okay, here's exactly what was changed within AWS, and have access to something like Jira, where it will see the change request that was put in. So kind of tie back an anomaly to a person, to a change like that, right? And that's normally like investigating anomalies takes some time. So that's one thing that we're looking to implement. We already have, a working concept of it. Number two is for efficiency on the AI side. It's really digging in and understanding how the engineers are using. Like, are you, looping context over and over again, which is causing the cost to go up? Or are you, working on a really big project where you've, established a testing framework for your new application that you've built, right? So we're still figuring that, efficiency piece out on the AI side, but for using it, yes, we're already there.
Wonderful. I want to pivot to the Q&A here. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I want to make sure we get a few questions, but I'll leave you just one other question. I'm curious in terms of how your organizations are thinking about overall people costs. There was an article, I think it was in the Journal not too long ago, where looking at the cost of an engineer, fully loaded cost of an engineer, you have, of course, the salary and bonus, et cetera, overhead, healthcare, so on and so forth. But now they're adding in, hey, an expected 50% of the total OTE, is going to come from AI consumption-based costs. Have either of your organizations started looking at the fully loaded cost of a developer in that context? Eric, start with you.
Well, says the guy who is, selling and creating these GPUs, right? 50% of that. We're roughly starting to look at like token consumption per person, but it's not a priority right now. Maybe one day it will be. I've have been thinking about that, especially when it comes to like lower cost regions and how, if somebody is consuming a ton of, Claude or whatever in a low cost region, does that kind of defeat the purpose? So I don't know, have no preference or opinion on that, but certainly something to think about for the future.
Salome, anything going over at FirstRand in that regards?
Same for us, same for us. Right now, we're focusing our effort on getting efficient in AI. We are very, very interesting topic to put in our parking lot, but we are not there yet.
Yeah, there's plenty to tackle. We don't need to add yet another thing. So good stuff. So let's get to some questions here. And as a reminder to the audience, feel free to post a question in the Q&A chat there, and we'll get to as many as we can here live. One I wanted to start with, we've been leaning a lot towards, or heavily in this conversation towards, pure plays, the Anthropics of the world and whatnot. How are you thinking about more traditional SaaS suites like take a O365 as Copilot becomes a larger and larger share of that overall spend pie. How do you think about that particular segment of vendors when you think about all the AI adoption and governance that you just mentioned? Salome, let's start with you there. Any thoughts?
So for us at the moment, something like Copilot and Office 365, we are very much targeting specific individuals for utilization where it's Copilot. We have a large organization. A lot of people are, for instance, tellers, things like that. So it isn't something that we roll out across our environment, because there wouldn't necessarily at this stage be a return on investment for somebody that is actually client facing, right? That may change in the future, but so we are very specific in terms of managing who we are giving AI and suites to versus our entire Office 365 estate. Josh.
Got it. Eric, how about at Boomi? Any thoughts there?
So for like use for seat-based licenses and all that, like we've built tools that will go out and evaluate who is using or who is not using, and if they're not using, their licenses will be pulled like automatically. If they want it back, of course, later they can certainly ask for it back. But we've looked at it, kind of taken a technology approach to it, where it'll automatically remove and re-add and all those things. But yeah.
During the procurement process, and of course, all this is putting a lot of pressure on procurement professionals as they, work on and negotiating these deals. What are you seeing in terms of their level of focus on not only understanding the portion of these traditional vendors that are, adopting the cost portion that are coming from, more and more consumption-based, AI-driven services that are part of the suite, and also what questions are you finding they're asking you and your teams in terms of what they should be concerned about, what they should be pushing for during those negotiations?
Value.
Eric, can I start with you?
I'm not a huge fan of like the seat-based licenses, although they're easier to predict. But I think my own personal opinion in the near future or not so distant future is we're probably going to be moving into a world of value-based pricing. So you pay for the value that you're getting out of said tool. We'll see if my own personal opinion transpires into reality, but that's certainly one question I'd like to ask vendors. What is the value that we're getting out of this solution that we're paying for?
Yeah, and you mentioned ProsperOps. First off, thank you for the compliments there, both on the acquisition, and we love hearing how satisfied our customers are with that solution. It's been a great addition to the Flexera portfolio. For those not familiar in the audience, ProsperOps' pricing model is a percentage of the value that's delivered in the form of savings on commitment managements. But when that first entered the organization, when you guys first adopted that, what was that conversation like? Was there skepticism or lack of trust as to how would this actually be calculated? How can we assure that that value really is what they say it is? What was that like, if you can think back 3 years? Because I'm imagining that what you just described is probably easier said than done in a lot of these organizations of really trusting and having the transparency from the vendors that they can, accurately predict and feel confident about these value-based pricing metrics.
Yeah, it was definitely a question at the time. And yeah, we're going back 4 years now. So yeah, really understanding and, hoping that they can deliver exactly what they say they can deliver. That was the biggest piece, in our brain as we were negotiating this contract. And I had some good references from people at the time who were using it. So that helped quite a bit in terms of, yes, they do what they say they will do. And I was able to take the, more or less the assessment that it showed and, showcased how much money it was going to be saving us on top of what I was already doing. And I was able to shop that around and compare it to multiple vendors, of course, at the time. And at the end of the day, we chose to go with this particular platform. It was a great decision, an amazing decision, right? Multiple millions of dollars later in savings, over the course of many years. It's certainly held its value and it did what it said it was going to do.
Wonderful. Well, we plan to continue and then some. Salome, how about on your end? What is procurement asking you for as it relates to arming them from a negotiating standpoint? Do you have an equivalent, on the FirstRand side in terms of value-based metrics and pricing models that you're adopting with certain vendors?
They are certainly asking about value and what are we actually gonna get out of it. But we are lucky in terms of our procurement team is very much in lockstep with our IT asset management and our FinOps team. So, we are trying to enable them with as much as information and how it works so that, when we negotiate effectively. So I think for us, it is really enabling, using our data to enable procurement to ask the right questions as well. And just keeping them in lockstep with us. That is what really is working from our end. Value-based, yes, we certainly want to get there. But I think in terms of being able to even explain the value that Copilot is giving into an organization in rands and cents or in dollars or in whatever currency you are working in is something that we all would still love to see. But we're working, obviously, that would be great.
And do you view that as your team's responsibility to kind of lead that effort, or are you an equal partner with the folks that are actually using the technology, be it in development or product engineering?
So for us, we are always an enabler. I think that's maybe the politically correct answer as well. Yet we like to enable, to guide, and be part of the solution, right? But no, FinOps and IT asset management can never do it on its own, right? So yes, we may lead, but it is always in collaboration with our teams.
Mm-hmm. Eric, how about you? Where do you see your role and your team's role being in this value-based journey with additional vendors and AI?
Also an enabler. I agree with everything that you said, Salome. We need to really partner up with the teams so they can understand, consumption models and the right questions to ask. But more importantly, what the value is of said solution that we're looking to buy or procure. Like, that is the most important piece. And it's, it shows why, people like myself and my teammate exist, because we're really good at understanding value.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to hear from both of you before we wrap things up. What keeps you up at night? Things have changed pretty dramatically. I'm sure many things. Let's focus on the professional things that keep you up at night. But when you think about how fast this is all changing, the slope of the curve, the expanding scope, what keeps you up at night as a leader of FinOps and as a key responsible party to make sure that we have fast but yet governed and efficient adoption of AI technology? So Eric, let's start with you.
For me, it's the rapid growth this year of AI consumption. I haven't seen it to this point, but now that it's started, it's growing faster than I expected. And I'm worrying that the plan that we've set forth may need to be readjusted in a different way if we want to continue to see the value that we're getting from these AI tools. So yeah, definitely a thought in my mind.
Okay, so the pace, in other words, the pace of adoption and presumably the resulting cost is going to outpace the value justification, and that will undoubtedly lead to some tough conversations and decisions internally at the organization. Okay.
Right. If we want to continue using at a certain pace, then it's going to cost more.
Yeah. Salome, how about you? What keeps you up at night?
And of course, when it costs more, how are you going to improve that value? Exactly, Eric. So I think that is exactly also from my side. But the other piece is, how can I use AI more effectively in my own operation? I think that is the other thing that I'm dreaming dreams about is, surely it can be, it's not surely, it is a game changer for FinOps and for IT asset management as well. And how can we do it better and faster ourselves? I think that's the other piece.
And I think within that statement, I'm sure competition comes into mind there as well. I mean, you know, part of this fast adoption is the need to keep pace with those that you compete with out in the marketplace. But well, wonderful. Well, thank you, Eric and Salome. Thank you so much. Really fascinating insights. It's always a pleasure and always a privilege to be able to hear directly from the people doing this. So we thank you again for your time and joining the group. And with that, we're going to turn things back over here, and we're going to hear from Steve Trask, who's going to bring us home and talk about the state of FinOps and some kind of key customer stories and a key keynote to end today's session. So thank you again for joining, everyone. And with that, we'll say our goodbyes. Thanks all.